Welcome back to the show. I'm honored to be joined today by the legendary voice actor and animator Justin Barrett. How's it going, Justin?
Hey, it's going pretty good there. How are you?
Oh my gosh, Paul Grape. I was gonna ask you to do the voice during the show. My gosh, that was accurate. Can you do that again?
Ah, you're too kind.
Oh my
I, I
goodness.
just I just make it up over here as I go along.
My gosh. Okay, let's hear Archibald.
I'm not going to Nineveh.
Oh my goodness, dude. That's that's crazy. Oh my goodness. Okay.
If you love your veggies and want more to know, then I've got for you a spectacular show. We be giving the facts of this lyrical rhyme and bringing in guests quite a lot of the time. If you search for your hairbrush like cheeseburgers too, then I'm happy to say we got a show for you.
Okay, well that was an incredible start to the show. So I was perusing your website recently. I was, checking your IMDb, your Wikipedia pages and your website, all that stuff, trying to get as much information on you and your career as I could. And you've done quite a lot. I want to start from the beginning. Um, your website states that you were an active animator from 2001 to 2008. Was this your first experience with animation, like 2001?
Uh, Kind of. So I see 2001, that's when I actually got hired at Big Idea, but I've been doing a little animation on some side projects, just personal stuff before then. But Yeah, I got hired at Big Idea in 2001. And that was my first job as an animator working there. So I was really, really very fortunate, very blessed to have that opportunity. Um, but yeah, I've been dabbling in it kind of on the side, like I said, personal projects and just experimenting with various things. I went to the Art Institute to study computer animation, and unfortunately, they're kind of defunct. Well, not kind of, they are defunct. The Art Institute of Seattle is where I went, and they shut down a few years back for financial reasons, I believe. But it was an interesting time to be getting into that kind of stuff because I was learning on 3ds Max and Softimage at school. I was playing with Blender and Lightwave at home, and also Animation Master. At the time I was playing with Blender, it didn't really have very good character animation features. So I lean more towards the Animation Master side of things. And that's what I used to do all my audition kind of demo pieces, applying for the job at Big Idea. But yeah, Big Idea was my first job as an animator.
Okay, so I didn't realize Blender was around back in the early 2000s.
Oh yeah, it's been around for a long time.
I guess it makes sense. I never thought about it. I kind of thought it was like more recent, I guess, software. Very interesting. Okay. So when did you decide you wanted to get involved with animation? What sparked this passion? Because you said you were working on animation before Big Idea. Big Idea, I guess, was your first gig. But when did you know that you wanted to be an animator?
I kind of gone back and forth. So I grew up loving computers and computer graphics. My first exposure to that was on a Commodore VIC-20 that my parents bought for our family. And as primitive as this stuff was, it still captured my interest. And so I was playing around with all kinds of, very primitive graphical kinds of things on that system. I got a Commodore 64 and then later on an Amiga, both because of their, the multimedia things they could do. Um, but I didn't initially think that I was going to go for animation. I was just like watching it, kind of keeping an eye on what could be done out there. And I saw some of Pixar's early stuff on some videos I borrowed from the public library. So they had, Red's Jr., Tin Toy, Red's Dream, Luxo Jr., Tin Toy, all those, really, really old Pixar films. And I knew I had a hunch they were going to do something cool. And then when I saw the first Toy Story trailer in the movie theater, that was like, okay, this is where animation is going to go big time. But I was kind of vacillating between how do I approach this? Like, do I go for, go the traditional route and take a college course of some kind to help teach me how to do all this stuff? Do I take out a massive loan and buy a computer and teach myself? And I figured I wanted people that knew what they were doing to, instruct me and coach me along with all this. So that's why I went to the Art Institute. But yeah, the kind of kickoff point was when I saw Pixar stuff. And then, like I said, when Toy Story hit the screen, that was like, okay, that cemented it because my other option, the other thing I was considering was getting into acting. And animation felt at the time anyway like it was a good mix of acting and the computer graphics, things that I both liked in a very almost equal level at that point. Um, so I decided, okay, I'm going to take the plunge. I'm going to go for it. The Art Institute over in Seattle seemed like I had a pretty good program. It was relatively new, but I felt like being an art school, that would be, a decent place to go to get that kind of education.
Okay, so you've always done CGI. You never looked into like two-dimensional animation. It was always computer
No,
graphics that interested you.
no, hand drawing has never been my thing. I would doodle, little tiny stick figure cartoons with friends of mine on the sides of our, school papers and whatnot. But I never felt comfortable. Partly, I think, and later on, I learned I've got these perfectionist kind of tendencies. So I didn't have the patience to, and even with the art classes that I had at the Art Institute where I'm doing traditional drawing and I had to do self-portraits and all this other stuff, those classes just drove me nuts because I was just so critical and picky about how the stuff came out, and I just didn't have the patience. It really frustrated me in many ways. But with the computer, I could, put something in place and then I could still tweak it and adjust it to get it to the point where I was happy with it. You can't quite do that when you're drawing. And even then, like early drawing programs didn't quite satisfy that thing at the same time or in the same kind of a way. So I just leaned pretty heavily into the CG side of things, thinking that I can always, mess with things long enough and refine and refine until I got to the point where I was happy with the result.
Well, that's another reason I think a lot of artists, including myself, prefer digital art over like hand drawn. Like I'll doodle, with pencil and pen. But if I'm gonna make like a full art piece, digital, you can go and you can erase. You can just press one button and undo a whole, line or series of lines, and tweak it until you're happy with it, like you said.
Hmm.
Um, One of the wonders of technology, I guess.
Yeah.
So, your first project as an animator, that would have been something at Big Idea, right? Your first, I guess, official project. Not like a personal project, but like a, project for a company.
Actually, I'm just remembering one of the things that I was doing before I went to the Art Institute, even uh, I had gotten into a video production class at the community college in the town where I grew up, and they had a Commodore Amiga in there, and that's when I first got my hands on Lightwave. And so I began dabbling in computer animation with that, and that led me to meet some folks taking the class who wanted to start their own video production business in the town where we were. So we had actually a business partnership for I don't know, a year or two. Actually, maybe even barely a year, come to think of it. But I did do a couple animated bits for that, but they were all like flying logos and, things flying around the screen or making thought bubbles appear above somebody's head, the 3D kind of a way. So I guess technically that was my first, real quote unquote business kind of project where I was doing something that would be seen by other people and not just a personal thing. But when it came to getting hired by a company, that was a big idea. That was my first one for that.
Okay, got you. So, do you remember the first project you worked on at Big Idea? Did you get brought in to work on Jonah, or were you working on the, direct to DVD stuff originally?
Originally, I was hired on the Penguins team. They were
Right,
hiring
right.
a junior animator slash TD, and most of the people on the Penguins team at that point did little bits of everything. So they would animate, obviously, but then some guys were better at rigging, some guys were better at modeling, and they would all, this entire team of like 10, 12 people, whatever it was, would do everything from the models to textures, lighting, everything, animation, all the way through the entire pipeline.
Oh,
Whereas it
wow.
was a little more split up over on the VeggieTales side of things, where they had an animation department where the animators just animated. So when I came into the Penguins team, at the time I came in, they were just finishing up. They'd already done all the animation for the second Penguins video, and so they put me to work doing paint fixing. So that's basically taking a Photoshop-like application that could do like, frame by frame, kind of going through, um, excuse me, taking a sequence of frames and doing, painting touch-ups and stuff because as cool as things were, they had, render glitches that would happen in various ways in those earlier versions of Maya. And so they literally went in frame by frame and painted out these mistakes. And so that's what I did for the first several weeks, I think, come to think of it. I don't remember how long a period of time that was. But despite, putting onto such of a grunt work kind of a project, it was still just tons of fun, just being among the crew and getting to know everybody and seeing what was coming up next. They're kind of getting an early start on the next video, I believe. And so I did paint fixing for episode 2, and then I was able to animate on episode 3. And that was my first actual, animation project. And I think the first shot that I got, if I remember right, um, it was trying to remember which, because they didn't necessarily assign things in the chronological order in the way they would appear in the show. And
Mhm.
so it was kind of like, okay, what sets are available right now and what props are available? Okay, we're ready to animate this scene, and I'm going to give it to so and so to get that job done. And in most cases, you would do a series of shots in a row. And so I think the first sequence I got was Jason. He's sitting at the table reading his comic book and eating the grapes.
Oh
And there was
yeah,
something that
yeah, I
had
know
to
what you're
do
talking
with
about.
that where he had to, bite the grape off and then complain about there being seeds and things like that. And then grandmom comes in, and he throws the grapes and gets all scared or whatever. So like 2 or 3 shots in that. I think that was the first actual sequence I animated on any project, The Big Idea.
Wow, okay, dang. 3-2-1 Penguins is one of those shows. You know how a lot of early CGI, even like Toy Story and Pixar, kind of looks awkward now? Penguins does not to me. It feels very natural and cartoony. The animation style doesn't feel weird, even though it was made so long ago.
Yeah, they had a really
It
good
holds
did
up.
a really good job of like the art direction on that and the
They
way they did the
did.
lighting. It really does hold up very well all these years later.
Yeah, very entertaining show. I didn't grow up with Penguins as much as I grew up with VeggieTales. I actually started watching Penguins. I think I finally sat down and watched the whole show maybe 2 years ago now.
Hmm.
I was like, dang, I've been missing out. It's a good show. I mean, I
Yeah, it's fun
easily
stuff.
I would have loved it just as much as VeggieTales had I, you know, gotten into it. So aside from Penguins, what are some other notable episodes or productions that you worked on while at Big Idea?
Well, unfortunately, the way that the Penguins flow went, they were discovering at the time that it was unfortunately just too expensive to produce everything in-house. So after episode 3 got done, everything from that point on got outsourced, all the actual animation and stuff. They still did the voice recordings in-house in Lombard. Um, and I think some of the designs and the story concepts are done there, but the actual production of the animation was done up at a company in Toronto. And so everybody on the Penguins team got shuffled over to the VeggieTales projects. And so I think the first one that we all got put on was when they were doing the Star of Christmas and an Easter Carol, kind of, side by side there. And I was started on some modeling stuff. I remember trying to model one of the hats or a hat, sort of like a fez style hat for one of the French peas. And my modeling skills were not all that great. And so I'm fighting and fighting this thing. And I think they moved me on to something else eventually. Um, but I got pulled off of that to work on Jonah. So I started working on, I think it was the Star of Christmas first, went off to work on Jonah, came back, finished on the Star of Christmas, and then we did the Easter Carol right after that was done. So I had Jonah kind of wedged in the middle of all that stuff. And that was, again, another really fun experience, working on a feature project. That actually moved me out of the Penguins room. I did my first couple shots at my desk in the Penguins room because the Penguins team was like physically separate from everybody else, like the main veggie team. But then they moved me out to be with the veggie team while working on Jonah, and then I moved back into the room again. Actually, I might not have. I think we kind of let the Penguins room just be another room for people to work in, and it wasn't the separated teams anymore again once the Penguins projects got outsourced. Um, so it was an interesting flow of things, starting on the or on the video project, going on to Jonah for several months, finishing that, and going back onto the videos again.
Well, you worked on some of the I would call them like the defining episodes of the show. Maybe defining moments of the whole franchise, the series. Jonah is definitely a you know top five movie of mine. The Easter Carol and Christmas special are regarded among the niche little VeggieTales fan to be like the most cleverly
Mhm.
written as well as just cleverly put together. The whole thing was just great, you know.
Yeah.
Just came together really well. So it's cool that you had involvement with some of the defining, moments in Big Idea. How long did you work with Big Idea?
I was there just about, it was almost a month shy of 2 years. As I think most people know by now, Big Idea had some financial problems. And what kind of startled me was I got my first taste of that in my first week of working there.
Oh, that's not
So
good.
I'm working on things again, doing the paint fixing, having a good time, thinking it's all great. And then, we get the email, hey, we're having an all company meeting. And the company was big enough that we all would walk across. So the studio was in a shopping mall in Lombard. And part of that mall, separate from the rest of it physically, but still part of the facility, was a movie theater. And so everybody in the company would walk down to the movie theater. We rented one of their spaces, and everybody would be in there, and Phil would be down on the floor, and the other executives talking, announcing various things that are going on. So I'm going into this all company meeting, thinking it was all great and exciting and everything, and they announced that they were doing layoffs, and that was like, holy cow! I just got here, and now I get the experience of,
Yeah.
wondering whether or not I'm going to keep my job. And it was a bit nerve-wracking, especially when I learned that the woman in HR who I've been working with a ton, getting hired at Big Idea, she got canned. And that was like, oh, great. Get to know you. See you later. Um, but that kind of woke me up to the volatility of the animation industry. Um, and there were some other, moments, later on, about a year and a half or so after that, then the other layoffs and more layoffs. And then they finally cut me in April so I started in 2001 in May, like a week before my birthday. And then I was let go, the final round of layoffs. I cut most of the production staff at that point. That was April of 2003.
Wow. There are some people actually we've reached out to, um, who worked on VeggieTales who declined a podcast interview because of that whole experience. They just didn't want to talk about it. Um, I imagine that'd be stressful though. I mean, like you said, you just got in there, and I guess you kind of joined in the midst of that financial struggle. It went on for a long time too. I think it was like a 3 year, kind of drowning, trying to keep themselves above water until they went under, and you know.
Yeah.
But VeggieTales, big idea as a company. It's more of a name now, less of a company. It still exists. You still see Big Idea at the end of
Hmm.
VeggieTales stuff, but it's owned by a company that's owned by a company that's owned by a company. It's like got three
Yeah.
parent companies above it now. I think it was Classic Media, Entertainment Rights, and then DreamWorks, and then most recently Universal, NBCU. Um, so it's
Hmm.
way down there now.
Yeah, I haven't even bothered to keep track of all the changing of hands that have gone on since I left. It was just really sad to see it go down the way it did. Um, but I like with many of the jobs that I've had over the years, I still am very close friends with many of the people that I work with there. So, that's one of the best things I got out of it was just, a lot of great relationships.
The Christmas live show came out 2006. How did you get roped into that? How did they get you back to voice Paul Grape and Archibald? I was never clear on that. I noticed in multiple live shows, Phil Vischer was absent, but he would still do some lines. Like I think he was still Bob in that live show, but he wasn't Paul and Archibald. I'm not sure the full scope of contracts, but how did that all come about?
So that actually started back at Big Idea. One of the things that I began dabbling with just for fun on the side, but in the middle of the Penguins, with my coworkers there, um, I had always had this interest in playing with voices, just for fun, not for anything beyond that at the time. And so on a whim one day, I began trying to, mimic some of the veggie character voices. And it seemed like I could most easily recreate those that were done by Phil. Bob is too close to Phil's own voice. It's just pitched a little higher, but the others have a little more, a little more character flavor, whatever you want to call it to them, that were far enough off. And I could, and I was trying to match the final version of these voices. So all the voices are pitch shifted in one way or another. And so I was matching what I heard and not necessarily what Phil was creating on the microphone. but I'm just goofing off with my coworkers in the Penguins room and, making folks crack up here and there and having some fun with it. And, somebody joked at the time, I forget who it was, but they said, if there ever comes a point where Phil can't do these voices, they're going to come after you. And I'm like, yeah, right. As if, I did not think that would be a thing. Well, fast forward many years, I went from big idea to a company in New Jersey called DPS for a little over, actually, a little under a year. And then I went down to Texas. I got hired by Real Effects. And, several years into that, I get a phone call out of the blue from David Pitts, who was our producer on the Penguin series. And he remembered me doing those voices. And he said, "Hey, we're doing this live show. And for various reasons, Phil is not able to do his voices of his characters. And they're recasting everything. Would you be interested in auditioning? Because I know you did this stuff back in the day." And I said, "Heck, yeah, I'll be, happy to give that a shot." So they sent me a few lines. And again, I think Bob was on that list. They did replace Bob for that live show. But again, that's so close to Phil's own voice. I didn't really feel I had a good grasp on that, but I had a better grasp, I felt, on like, Pogray, Archibald, Mr. Nezzer, Mr. Lunt, and that kind of stuff. And so I think they had, I forget how many characters they sent me the lines for, but I did my audition and they gave me both Pogray and Archibald. And I was kind of shocked that I got two of them, let alone one. Um, but that worked out really well. And so I forget, some a month or two after that, they flew me to Nashville, and it was an all-day recording session in this studio, doing both characters and everything, the speaking lines, the singing parts, all the whole nine yards. And it was just a ton of fun. But again, it was weird because again, I'm used to mimicking the final product, and they were still thinking they had to pitch my voice. I mean, I think they did do a little pitch shifting on some of the stuff. But my approach was to just match what I heard of the final voice for each character. Um, but and then I actually got to see the show when it came to Dallas Fort Worth, when it was all finished, and that was a really fun experience, being in the audience and seeing the whole thing. I'd never seen any of the VeggieTales live shows, so had that be the first one that I saw was a real treat. But yeah, it was a weird combination of events that led to that project.
How much hope do you think our fandom has of seeing that show eventually? Do you know if anyone saved it? Is it on a file somewhere?
I don't know. I've seen snippets. I think there are still chunks and individual snippets and scenes you can find on YouTube. Um, at one point, I did get somebody, in one of the project, I forget who it was, sent me the audio files. And the way they did the audio for this stuff, all the character stuff was obviously pre-recorded and timed out. And then the live performers, the actual humans in the show interacting with the veggie characters, they would have to make sure they delivered their lines, timed right in the proper gaps in the dialogue. But the whole thing was like one big pre-recorded audio with all the songs. Everybody, the only things missing were the live characters' lines. And so somebody has sent me the tracks for both segments of the show. They split up into acts, in a very similar way they do for other plays and stage productions. And so I think I got the files at some point, and I don't think I have them on my current computer. But we were talking before this is all set up. I'm gonna try and dig through my archives. I think I still might have those recordings someplace. And I think there was at one point I was trying to pull out, some lines from that to use for like a voice demo or something along that line years and years ago. But I don't know if the actual full video of those is available anywhere, at least not legally. I don't know. Um, but I remember digging through trying to find some snippets online when you and I began talking, and I'm pretty sure I found some clips from that show on YouTube. So chunks of it are still out there.
Interesting. Now, a little bit off topic, but there was allegedly an animated, like 2 minute song in the beginning, Boy Like Me with Junior. Do you have any recollection of that?
No, I don't remember that part at all.
Okay,
Um, I
that's
remember the
something
the
to.
biggest part being obviously the main body of the show, but I don't remember an animated, intro like that.
Yeah, because Joshua Gunther. Do you know Joshua Gunther?
Oh yeah, Josh and I are great friends.
Yeah.
We haven't talked in a long time, but he and I got hired at the same time.
Oh,
So
interesting.
we kind of, grew up together, so to speak, at Big Idea.
I've read that he had done an animation for the intro, and when you have a fandom, VeggieTales has a huge following, right? But like the people doing the stuff I do, searching out the people and stuff, very niche little group of people.
Hmm.
We've been scouting that out too. But if you happen to find recordings of your voice, that'd be incredible. We'd love to see that.
Yeah,
So
if I
let's
can find that stuff, I'll pass it along.
let's talk about Real FX. Could you tell me a little bit more about it?
So Real Effects is the brainchild of Dale Carmen, and he had a couple guys, Chuck, blanking on Chuck's last name for some reason. It was Dale and a couple other guys. They started this kind of, their own studio, animation studio in Dallas. Um, Kind of similar to how I guess Phil and those guys started theirs, just, Dale and his friends, working in, private offices and out of their bedrooms and whatnot. Um, and it just kind of slowly grew and grew. They were doing a lot of projects around the Dallas Fort Worth, and then began getting, you know, commercial clients and various things. So by the time I came on board, they've been around a while. But funny thing, when I was applying to Big Idea, one of the things that I did at the time was an audition for a remote animation job for Real Effects. And at the time, this was back in, I think, mid 2000s, somewhere in that range. Uh, Real Effects was working on producing um, it was supposed to be a feature film called Paw Island. And it had all these animal characters, lots of, cats, mostly, I think, from what I recall, the concept art and various things. But one of the main characters, a character named Key Cat, Kee Cat, Kat. And the demo that they were asking the animators to do was to take that character, and the character was modeled in Radiant Animation Master. So I had experience in that, which is cool for me. And they gave you the character rig, they gave you an audio file, and you had to animate it and tell them how long it took you to get the thing done. And so that was my first real kind of full on with dialogue character animation piece that I'd ever done. I had done some personal tests and projects with like one of those 3D model of one of those little wooden desk mannequin kind of deals.
Mhm.
But the KeyCat test I did for Real Effects was the first test with full dialogue, lip syncing, and everything. And it's a fun project to do. But I got their permission to then send that to Big Idea to show them, okay, here's where I'm at. Because my demo reel coming out of the Art Institute didn't really have much character animation on it. And those few pieces I'd done personally with the little art mannequin guy didn't really show them. They needed to know that people could handle dialogue, obviously, for all the stuff the character in, Big Idea projects had to do. So I got permission from Real Effects to finish their test and then send the result to Big Idea as an audition piece of sorts for the Penguins job I was applying for.
Okay, so you worked with them before Big Idea, then you kind of started working with them before Big Idea, and then came back
Well,
around after Big Idea.
it was just the audition. That project never got off the ground. I never heard anything more about it, never saw any more about it. I think it just flopped at some point. I don't know when or how, but it never went anywhere, sadly. It was kind of fun. It's a fun concept, I thought. Um, And so to later on learn after leaving Big Idea, I went to DPS, like I said, and then one of the guys on the Penguins team, Keith Lango, he had been hired by Real Effects to work on a direct-to-video GI Joe project that Real Effects was producing for Hasbro. And I was still working at DPS at the time, but I quit that because, long story short, it was just not the best situation, unfortunately. Um, but again, the people I met there, really awesome guys. I actually met the guy who was my boss at the studio, Jack Airbar, and Andrew Wiedenhammer. Both those guys I met about a year ago. I went out to Atlanta for something else, and they're still in the Atlanta area working together. They got their own, studio out there called Millions of Tiny Robots, which is really fun.
Well, that's cool.
Anyway, so went to DPS, did all that stuff, and then left that because I heard from Keith that Real Effects needed some animators to help finish up this G.I. Joe thing they were doing. So I left DPS, worked freelance from New Jersey to help finish up a few animated shots on the G.I. Joe project. and then Real Effects hired me full time, and that was in the summer of 2004 when I came down to Texas from New Jersey. Um, so
So
that's
was
what got me in there. And so it was again these big idea connections, a lot of different places. And another one of the guys from the Penguins team, Tim Lannon, he ended up coming to Real Effects as well to work on a bunch of things. So he and I got to work together again, and Keith, and maybe I think there was a few others in there as well that rubbed shoulders again over the years. So that was kind of cool.
was it a pretty smooth transition from Big Idea to Real FX? Because I guess you left Big Idea and then joined Real FX pretty close in proximity, right? Like within the course of maybe a year, year and a half, right?
Yeah, so when I was at DPS after Big Idea, I was their lead animator over there. And then coming down to Real Effects, it was just, getting back in the animation team again. And working with Keith, that right there made it really comfortable to just kind of slot myself in and get going with stuff. Uh, so yeah, the transition wasn't very difficult at all, I don't think.
That's good. How did it differ, working at Big Idea versus Real FX? You had some of your same friends working with you, which I'm sure was nice. But were there any notable differences between, I guess, the way they ran things, the way, the process, I guess, of getting animation done?
Not really. The basic process is pretty consistent among most studios. The main differences you're going to find are, maybe custom tools or techniques that one studio uses to get certain things done. Um, Real Effects had become at that point very good at mimicking other studios' looks and feels, and so one of the first things that I got introduced to was so we finished off the G.I. Joe project. They brought me on, and then there was a British kind of spin-off sort of character, a similar kind of vein as G.I. Joe called Action Man. And and Hasbro still owns that property as well. And so we finished the G.I. Joe project, and they asked us to do this Action Man story right after it. And then once that was done, one of the things we did next was for Blue Sky. So they were just working on their robots film and has just finished that up. We're doing some, teasers and various promotional bits for it. And one of the things that they wanted to do was one of those turn off your cell phone announcements in the movie theater. And so they had the robots characters all sitting together, and then the robot, none of them were voiced, but the robot that in the film was voiced by Robin Williams, I forget his name, the red kind of skinny guy. He was the one talking on his phone, and then this big magnet comes in and sucks him up and carries him out, on top of the little title screen that says, "Please silence your cell phones," and that kind of stuff. So one of the things that Real Effects had to do was they weren't getting, I think we did get the models for the characters, but the shaders and things like that made them look the way they did. And so, gloriously nice and metallic and cool looking. Those are all proprietary things at Blue Sky. So Real Effects had to do their best job to recreate that look from scratch. And they just got really good at doing that kind of a thing. So the first thing they did was that project for Blue Sky on that. And that led to other projects for Blue Sky down the road. And other studios began seeing that Real Effects could do this kind of look mimicry really well. And so that led to a bunch of other projects for DreamWorks and Sony and a whole bunch of things down the road. Um, Real Effects got hired to do various promotional pieces like the McDonald's commercials or, um, you know, for some reason, McDonald's commercials are the ones that jump to mind the most readily. Um, for Kung Fu Panda, a couple years later, we did a piece for the Kung Fu Panda DVD. So they wanted to have a kind of extra little story telling the backstory of the Furious Five characters, called The Secrets of the Furious Five, not surprisingly. And so their own animation team for DreamWorks is working on something else, and so they hired Real Effects to do this piece for the DVD. But again, we had to mimic the look of the Kung Fu Panda characters, all that the fur and the way they, the deformations and everything like that had to be kind of redone in-house. Uh, and so that was another fun one I got to work on, kind of in the background in a way. Um, but that's one of the main differences I would think between, Real Effects and Big Idea. Big Idea did pretty much all their own stuff, whereas Real Effects started out doing a lot of commercial work, a lot of these kind of work for hire projects for other studios. And then they were using that to transition and kind of build their chops to the point where they could produce their own original things. And I think one of the first ones they did in that vein was I'm blanking on it now. The one with the turkeys.
Was it Freebird?
Freebird, yeah. The title of the thing kept changing back and forth. I think turkeys might have been an early title for that thing, but yeah, Freebirds, yeah. So that was the first one where they collaborated with the director. The director, designed the characters and the story and all that stuff. And then that was purely a real effects project. It wasn't a property, brought on from somebody else. And then they've gone on to do a bunch of other similar kinds of things since then. Um, but that's kind of how real effects cut their teeth, was doing all this, collaborative work for hire stuff. So those are one of the biggest differences I know. But as far as the production pipeline went, it was virtually the same kind of thing. Most of what happened to Big Idea, aside from the Penguins team, where everybody did little bits of everything, most other studios, including Real Effects, divide things up into very specific, pipeline chunks. So you have a modeling team, rigging team, animation team, lighting team, effects and compositing, audio, all that stuff. Audio is always its own separate thing, but as far as the visual components, most studios split things up into very compartmentalized chunks. And then the project kind of works its way through those different departments in a progressive kind of way. And Real Effects got to a point where, but part of what they were doing beginning back in the days with that whole Paw Island KeyCat test thing was they had built a very effective remote pipeline, or a pipeline that supported remote workers very effectively. And so we did a lot of projects at Real Effects where we had a team in-house doing, some of the animation, but then we would hire double that number of people remotely from around the world, quite literally, to also animate and contribute their portions of things. It was mostly animation as far as that kind of remote collaboration side of things. That was mostly what was done. It was harder to kind of farm out other parts of the production process, maybe some modeling here and there, but most of those guys tended to stay in-house. But for animation, they had no qualms about hiring people from like I said, anywhere in the world. Um, and so that was another big difference between the two that I can think of.
Is Real Effects still around today? Are they still working on stuff?
Oh yeah, they're definitely still around. I'm not familiar with the projects they're working on right now. Um, I know there was an animated Scooby-Doo film that they did a few years back.
Oh yeah, that looked great.
Um, Trying to remember some of the other ones. I kind of lost track of the things that they were working on. Because when I left, they were starting to work on, oh, they were working on Book of Life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they were doing some initial animation tests and rig tests and stuff like that on Book of Life at the point where I took off in 2012. Um, but oh yeah, they're definitely still around. They've actually got, I think, two different studios now. So I think there's still one in Dallas Fort Worth. It's not in the same building that we were in. So when I first got there, they were in a building called the Coffee Roaster. It was like a multi-story building, and they had, um, a coffee sales, some kind of coffee place in there on the ground floor, and then Real Effects had like the upper three floors or something along that line. And then they bought the building across town that used to be, um, I think it was broadcast.com. Mark Cuban owned the place, and he actually came on board as one of like the executive, on the board of directors for Real Effects at some point. Um, but the old yahoo.com building in Deep Ellum. So they were in that place for many, many years. And then at some point after I left, they moved across town into like a high rise, taking up 2 or 3 floors there, I think. And I think they still have that, but they also got, I think they have a studio or a branch up in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. Like I said, I haven't followed the studio terribly closely to see all the various changes that have happened, but those are things that kind of stick out in my mind from random things I think I've seen online.
Now, does Real FX ever handle concept art, storyboards, or are they, solely the computer animation aspect of the production?
They had everybody in-house. They had the concept guys in-house. They had, storyboard artists doing all their stuff. That was all internal.
Wow.
Again, at least as long as I was there. And I knew some of the guys working in those other departments as well. And again, just they had everything from beginning to end. You could do the entire production pipeline at Real Effects if you wanted to. Um, so yeah, just a lot of great talent there.
That's pretty cool. I know they worked with VeggieTales as a company, briefly. They
Hmm.
had submitted like a little reel, which got found somewhat recently. I think it might be on their
Yeah, they
YouTube
they
channel.
put a bid in for that. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, the Whip It animation, if you've seen that with the carrots, with the hats and stuff. Um, they ended up working on the Jonah sing along, and I think they did some concept art for the Penguin show that you worked on, the
Mm.
Carnival. Um, that's pretty cool. I didn't know much about them as a company, so it's nice to learn more. Two locations now?
I think there's just the two, and they may still be hiring remote folks for like the animation side of things. But again, I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I haven't followed them super closely.
Oh, that's
Um,
really cool.
yeah.
Very nice. Okay, so following Big Idea, you went into Real FX. Following Real FX, excuse me. Um, I guess you'd already been, dabbling in voiceover, with the Christmas live show and whatnot. But when you left Real FX in 2012, did you know that you wanted to go into voice acting?
Oh yeah, totally. Because I had continued a good chunk of that while at Real Effects. So one of the other things, so the Veggie Tales live show, that was one thing that got me thinking, okay, maybe I want to pursue this VO thing a little bit more. But then I started doing stuff for in-house projects. And so they had like a web portal kind of thing called Webasaurs for a while. It only lasted like a year or two and then just kind of faded away. But I got to voice one of the characters. So they had four kind of main characters, and one of them was a pterodactyl named Terry. And so I was Terry's voice for virtually everything they did. Um, and then they would bring things in. They would have commercial projects coming in or any number of things that needed, temporary voices for, while they're doing the editing and things like that. And one of the projects that came in was for an EA game called Boom Blocks for the Nintendo Wii. And the commercial they were producing in-house was had all these animal characters. I mean, all these animals in the game, but in the commercial, they all had voices and were talking to each other about this kind of chaos going on with things blowing up and whatnot. And so I came in and did scratch voices, or so I thought anyway, for like five or six different critters. There was a monkey and a sheep and a guy. I don't know what kind of creature he was, but he was wearing like a medieval style outfit, armor and things. Um, there's a whole variety of characters in this thing, and I voiced them all. And again, thinking later on somebody come in and redo the whole thing. Well, a couple weeks later, I forget how long that was. The producer on the project came to my desk in the animation side of things and said, "So the guys on the project, they love what you did for the voices. They want to keep every voice you did in the project, and they want to offer you this much money in for as compensation for your voiceover work." And it was a not insubstantial sum. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take that. And so I'm like, okay, so maybe I should, consider this VO thing a bit more seriously. And I began just doing it on the side at home, just auditioning for random projects online. I would get some here and there. I would occasionally get permission to use the Real Effects voiceover booth to just record a quick audition for a project because I couldn't run home and do it. Um, and so some of those would come through here and there, but that's kind of where the whole VO thing started, was even before I left. Just, getting that encouragement from what I was already doing there, and then just kind of taking, okay, I want to, leapfrog and just see how far this thing can go. So when I left in 2012, my whole goal at that time was to pursue a mix of voiceover and perhaps other acting projects as well, seeing about getting into, film if I could. There was a lot of film companies in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and probably still are, and various projects to come through town, whether it's commercials or there was a couple series that had been shot there. Some films come through for various things, a lot of independent projects. And I wanted to just kind of, test those waters and see where that would go. So, yeah, when I left Real Effects, I was already, kind of well on my way as far as VO went.
So you've done character voicing. You've done voiceover for advertisements, and your website also listed some audiobooks. Which of these did you enjoy the most, and how did they notably differ?
So it's interesting because people think that when you do a commercial, it's not a character voice, or when you do an audiobook, it's not a character voice. I mean, obviously, the actual character voices aside. But one of the things that studying voiceover taught me was that everything is a character. You have to think about the context of what you're doing, that your target audience, what kind of emotion you want to evoke through your vocal performance. So there's always character involved somehow in voiceover, whether it's, the most basic TV commercial to the most crazy cartoon. Um, and so it's just tapping into and understanding how to get into and out of these various character modes to deliver the lines in the right way for the kind of project that you're doing. So that said, I have a hard time trying to figure out which one would be a favorite. I know the one that was hardest, actually, oddly enough, the one that I enjoy doing the most is character voices, but the one that I found the hardest to do from an audiobook perspective was the character voices because I got hired to do like a couple books and like a two books in a series and like a young adult sci-fi series. Um, and each book had, upwards of 30 unique characters in them. And so it's like trying to come up with, and again, the perfectionist in the back of my mind is thinking they have to be all very distinct and very unique and very creative and this and that and the other. And that was a challenge, trying to keep the voices consistent, trying to say, okay, oh, great, I got a new guy here on page 148. He's a one-off, but I need to still develop a character for that person so that they don't sound like I'm just, mumbling something under my breath, and kind of, phoning it in, you might say. So, coming up with that stuff was a bit more challenging, a lot more challenging. And I actually found myself now, so kind of fast forwarding a little bit here, I'm still doing some audiobook recording on the side just for personal enjoyment, really is all it is. But I'm leaning more towards nonfiction projects, partly because I don't want to get myself, in that stranglehold of being frustrated by not being happy with coming up with the character voices for, various characters in a story, for example. But also because I just find it fascinating to find different elements of history and be able to tell those stories. So I'm leaning more towards again, the nonfiction side. I'm not even bothering to do character voices. If people are talking to each other in those kind of contexts, I just, say the lines, but still put the character into it to give you an idea what the personality is, not so much, the pitch or inflection or are they nasal or this kind of stuff. And I can just kind of back off from that and enjoy telling the story of whatever it is, whether it's the 116th Battalion in France, which is one solo project I'm working on right now. Or actually, I did do some character voices. The group I'm doing this with online is called LibriVox, and it's basically volunteers from around the world that take public domain text and then record them as audiobooks, and then release the audiobooks in the public domain. And I didn't even realize this until I was digging around the site several months back, but the Hardy Boys books, classic books, and I read tons of those when I was a kid. Those are slowly coming into the public domain. And
Oh,
so some of the people on the site said, hey, I want to start recording these and do it with different people reading different characters, and then one person acting as the narrator for the whole thing. And so I did pick up a couple character voices for that, but that was a little easier in a sense because I'm focusing on one character. I'm not trying to do every character in the entire book.
yeah.
Um, but even with some of the commercial projects, again, it's finding the right tone for this kind of thing you're trying to tell a story about, and everything is a story when it comes down to it. Even trying to sell a product, there's a story involved in that somehow, and so knowing how to use the voice to tell that story and again carry the right emotions and elicit the right kind of response from the listener, ideally, hopefully, is still kind of an interesting and fun challenge sometimes when it comes to voiceover projects of various kinds.
Audiobooks are interesting. I grew up listening to a lot of audiobooks, and I don't think I ever really paid attention to it. How different all the characters' voices were, but the people who would read the books would put a lot of effort in to make them all different,
Mhm.
and it just felt right.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how I came across it. There was a very small, maybe only one or two person company at the time that was, trying to be an independent audiobook publisher. And I got involved with this group, and you could audition for a variety of different projects, and I auditioned for that and got the two books together. Um, and then years later, that organization just kind of fell apart, unfortunately. But it was still a fun way to kind of cut my teeth in like the early days of my voiceover experience.
Yeah, yeah, it gave you practice, right?
Yeah.
I think we're better for everything we make. So you're clearly a very talented voice actor, and you have a big portfolio. When did you quit pursuing voice acting, and what led you to quit pursuing it?
I kind of, man, when it's hard to really pinpoint when that happened. I think part of it though came about when, so let me just kind of backtrack through the history of things there. So I left Real Effects in 2012 and I was going after voiceover and acting again and hoping to do that kind of stuff full time. It did work out for a few years, but I found myself getting more experience and kind of it just threw me for a loop how this all happened. But I still had this very much of an interest in like live performance of various kinds. Initially in the theater back as I was growing up, but after I left Real Effects, I'm like, what do I do for work? I want to get into acting and voiceover, but how do I, pay the bills in the meantime? And so it was admittedly a bit of a risky chance I was taking. But one of the things that I did in the area I was living in at the time, there was a resort that had a contract with DreamWorks, and they had costume characters going around the property at various events and whatnot. And so I had loved, I did them like some one or two very one-off kinds of things, doing like a, Easter bunny at somebody's birthday party or something like that. And even like one of my early experiences at Real Effect, sorry, at a Big Idea, when the second Penguins video came out, they had like an all company thing and they wanted to have, they had blow up kind of inflatable versions of the Penguins characters as blow up characters to walk around at this event. And they offered, folks in the studio, mostly on the Penguins team, if they wanted to get in costume as these things. And so I got into a costume and had performed in that way, on some occasions. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe this would be a good side gig to get into. So I got on with the resort and did the DreamWorks stuff. So I got to be Kung Fu Panda and I got to be, you know, uh, Fiona, the ogre Fiona, and I got to be Gloria the hippo from Madagascar. And
Oh,
just having fun, playing outlandish, cartoony kinds of characters. But then that led into just as taxing as it was to do that kind of stuff, I was just having way too much fun. And so I just kept going after more of that same kind of thing. It eventually, it was started out doing like corporate work and corporate characters. So I got to do Lego Shaggy and Donkey Kong and, a variety of things along that line, and even some independent characters just from around town. And then that led into actual mascot work for sports, which kind of threw me for a loop. But I found that I had definitely an interest in it, and I did it well enough for people to hire me to do these characters. So I began just doing a lot of sports mascot stuff, and that just kind of blew up. And I think that's what ultimately got me out of voice acting was I was working so much as a mascot performer for various teams that I was just enjoying that more, and it was a lot less stressful at the time. So I didn't put as much effort into the VO side of things. I might have still done some smaller projects on the side, but the bulk of my effort at the time was working as a sports mascot, which is kind of fun.
man, your portfolio is incredible to me. You've done everything. I mean, I'm learning new stuff. I went all over your website, all over your Wikipedia, IMDb. I'm hearing stuff now I had no idea about. That's incredible.
Well, largely because when it comes to sports mascots, the general rule of thumb is you don't talk about the characters you perform. And so I'm not going to tell you any of the teams I work for, any of the characters that I've done outside of some of the corporate stuff. I'll just say that I've been very blessed to have some amazing opportunities with very high profile teams over the years. Um, and it's just been a ball. And I'm just I want to bring a smile to people's faces. Well, I got into animation in the first place. I wanted to, be part of entertaining a crowd and bringing them, some positive memories from things they've been either seen or experienced or whatever it may be.
Well, being in a character costume like that is kind of a form of animation when you think about it. You're bringing the character to life and,
Hmm.
you know, I guess animating them for the crowd.
Yeah, and it's fun getting to be a variety of different kinds of characters too, and learning about those different characters' personalities and how do you convey that without saying a word to anybody who happens to be around you. It's that's a ton of fun.
Did you ever slip up and speak from the costume?
Nope.
No.
Again, I learned that pretty early on that you don't talk.
I would have
Um,
I would have messed up. Somebody would have
yeah,
given me
that
a high
definitely got
five and I'd be
drilled
like,
in.
"All right," from inside the costume, and I would have been booted. Did you have to travel as a mascot? I'm assuming you did, right?
We currently live in Las Vegas, and we've been here 4.5 years. We moved out here because my wife's parents are getting older and needed some help in their final years, and they both passed away within the past 8 to 10 months.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And so that's part of the reason why we're moving out to Georgia sometime soon because their house is going to be sold. Um, but when I was doing the mascot stuff, there were times where I would do some travel. I would get sent to someplace else in the state. Um, there are very rare times where I've flown across the country, usually for longer things like, training camps and stuff like that, where it's like a week or two away from kind of the home base, you might say. But not usually a lot of really long distance travel for mascots so it tends to be pretty local to where the team is. Uh, so most things I did kind of in the region where the team resided.
So tell me a little bit about what you're up to now. I noticed all about that base, your YouTube channel. Very well put together. From the thumbnails to the editing. Um, I gave it a quick look through, and I liked what I saw. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
So how that all came about was I was playing around. I've had this kind of interesting dichotomy or dual personality, I might say, for a lot of my, years. I have the side of me that loves the technical stuff, and I did a lot of, technical programming kinds of things at RealFX. After I didn't talk about how I switched from being an animator at RealFX to being the animation TD at RealFX. So it got to a point where animation was no longer fun. It was literally causing me stress, like serious levels of stress. And I couldn't figure out why, because up until that point, I had been largely enjoying the animation work that I was doing. And this was right around 2007 when this kind of first started coming up. And so I'm just trying to figure out how do I handle this stress that I'm feeling, and the bigger projects would come in and I would just get more stress and more stress. I'm like, why am I not enjoying this anymore? And so at the same time, kind of on the side, I was dabbling in like the programming side of the animation software. And so I got to thinking, okay, well, maybe I can do some of that for the studio. And I started talking to people about that. I began doing little bits of things here and there. And then when the big kind of stress point hit, I'm thinking, okay, I literally was like in tears in the parking lot of the studio, calling my wife saying, I just got this assignment. It's causing me so much anxiety, like a panic attack almost level of anxiety. And so I began having conversations saying, I need to make a transition away from animation into maybe this technical side of things. And so these conversations were like, okay, well, we're happy to have that kind of thing happen if you want to make that shift. But the problem is that we don't have anybody in our technical department making the salary you make as an animator. So to keep the salary that you've got right now, you got to kind of effectively prove to us that this change is worth making. And so I got put through the ringer, not like intentionally, but just what happened at the time, we had two projects coming through. So it was the Kung Fu Panda project I mentioned earlier, direct to DVD. But at the same time, we were also producing the first of what turned out to be, I think, at least two, if not, I think it was just two that we did. Um, we were hired by Sony to do a direct-to-video sequel for Open Season, their feature film. So we did Open Season 2 direct to DVD. That was coming through and being animated at the same time as we were animating on the Kung Fu Panda bit, The Secrets of the Furious Five. And so I had transitioned at that point with both projects happening at the same time. We had at least 30 people, 30 on the animation team in-house, and at least that many, if not more, remote animators around the world. And my job, my new job at that time, was to support that team, to make sure that the remote guys knew how to set up their environments to take our project files and work with them and then give them back to us in a way that fit our pipeline. If things broke, I had to figure out how to fix it. All of these various, very, very technical things going on, despite me being in such a creative mode up until that point, and yet doing the technical stuff on the side, just kind of play around with it. And what was first off kind of a weird realization was that all of that didn't stress me out nearly as much as the animation challenges that I was facing before I made that change. So I just leaned into it hardcore. So we finished both of those projects. It was sometime in the summer, and we were doing like our annual reviews at the time. And they pulled me into a conference room. I'm there with my former animation supervisors and my new technical supervisors and other heads of the studio. And in my mind, I was thinking, please, I just want to keep my salary. I don't want to take a pay cut. That was my kind of internal prayer going on. And they caught me off guard and gave me a raise. And my former animation supervisor said, I think based on what just happened, maybe this is where you should have been going all along in this more technical direction. That was his assessment anyway. So I leaned into it even harder, and I was now the animation TD from that point, which was like mid 2008 all the way through 2012, mid 2012. So a pretty solid 4 years of doing very, very technical stuff from that point on. And so that kind of was where I've been dabbling in programming since I was a child, with the Commodore VIC-20 even. But that was like my first foray into like full-time being a developer, thinking like a developer, while also working on a creative team to solve creative problems. Um, but that kind of came back ultimately later on. So when I left the studio, I was going for, again, the creative side of things. And then that led into doing the mascot stuff for a bit. But then I ended up finding through a total random thing through a film YouTube channel called Film Riot. Every so often they would plug, products they found they were using in their efforts and things. And they plugged a program or a service really called Airtable. It's basically a database in the cloud, really what this is. And I'd not worked much with databases up until that point. And so I thought, okay, I'll give this thing a shot and play around with it and see what I can do. Well, what started as playing around and random experimentation turned into virtually an obsession. I love working with the thing. I love figuring out ways to build databases to better organize the stuff that I wanted to organize in a variety of different ways. And I began helping other people as well to organize their stuff. And eventually Airtable got into the added programming capabilities. So I got back into coding through doing that kind of stuff. And that's what all led into All About That Base. So the name behind that, the idea behind that was, databases in Airtable are just called base or bases. And so All About That Base was a clever way of taking the song title and spinning it into this entire channel is all about Airtable databases, how you work with them, how you build field formulas and how you design your database structure and all that kind of stuff. And after the pandemic, unfortunately, kicked me out of my most recent mascot job, I had to pivot and figure out, okay, I need to support my family, I need to make an income here. And so I leaned back into the programming side of things and the more kind of left brain side into Airtable development and consulting. And that started as a channel and then turned into what I thought was going to be my freelance empire, not necessarily literally an empire, but like that was my goal, was to go full-time freelance and just do Airtable development, consulting, and all that kind of stuff. And then I did it on the side for a while still trying to get some mascot stuff done. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to set aside everything else that I'm doing except for Airtable consulting, the Airtable development. I had some ideas for courses I wanted to build. Um, and I said, I'm going to launch myself as a full-time consultant, full-time business at the beginning of 2022. And 3 months into that, actually less than 3 months, come to think of it, one of the clients I had at the time who had been feeding me, projects nonstop for doing stuff in Airtable, we were talking one day, and he had kind of jokingly before said, "Hey, I should just hire you full time, and because I could really use all your help." And so we're having a conversation about all these things he wanted to get done in the next few months. And I just threw it back at him and said, "You know what? You could just hire me full time and be done with it." He said, "Are you serious? You willing to do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." And so that's the job that I have right now. I work full time, not just in Airtable, but doing a lot of programming, a lot of database development though in Airtable, and a variety of different bases and workspaces and whatnot. So the all about that base side of things, unfortunately, was kind of short-lived in the sense that I had plans to do it full time and make that like my full time endeavor, do a lot more stuff on YouTube. And then once I transitioned over to actual full time job, doing all that during the day left me with little to no energy to do even more of it after hours. I'm at a point now, I'm sadly getting older, and so it's my energy reserves are a lot smaller than they used to be. So I've got the energy to get through a day of, full-time programming and development and database management and all this stuff, but it's hard to do more of the same in the few remaining hours I have left in the day. So I'm not quite sure about the fate of the YouTube channel and all that stuff. I still want to keep it going as best I can, but I haven't put anything new on the channel in the better part of 2 years, just because of that reason I just explained there, the whole, energy crisis, the personal energy crisis, you might say. Um, so I wish that there hadn't been so much, juggling and switching of things and more consistency. That's the one I think, if any minor, very minor, if there's a minor regret that I have looking back, is that I couldn't find what I wanted and just stick with it. But again, that's a perfectionist side of me thinking from back in my high school days, I thought they were, I remember career counselors coming in high school and saying the average person has X number of jobs and careers over the course of their life. And me at the time, very naive, thinking, no, I'm going to pick one thing, I'm going to stick with it, and that's going to be what I do forever. And I have proven them right and myself wrong because I have jumped and jumped and jumped through so many different hoops and between so many different, levels of work and kinds of work. I'm hoping that I can stay somewhat stable now in this development side of things. I've been full time at the company for 2 years now, and I work with amazing people. And we're actually in the process of trying to move out to Georgia. I've been working remotely for those 2 years, but the company is just outside of Georgia, and so I want to move out there and you know get some more kind of in-person time with the company a little bit. It's a very small company, but just amazing, amazing people. Um, and so that's kind of the long, 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 not even close to short story about all about that base and how it came and how it's almost gone and not quite not gone, but mostly gone.
It's a very clever channel though. I love the name.
I've always loved wordplay and clever language, things. And so when I thought about that, I'm like, I have to use that. There's no other way to go.
So like I said, your profile's tremendous. I was impressed before I had you on the show. I'm even more so now. Remarkable stuff. You've worked on quite a few different things. They all differ from each other. But in retrospect, you're still going, obviously, still working on stuff. But looking at your career, everything you've done up to this point, everything you're doing now, what has been the most fun or, rewarding project that you were a part of?
Oh, you're asking me to pick a favorite, and that's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I don't, it really is tough to try and pick, one, two, whatever number of things and say those are at the top of the list and everything else sits below that because I like so many things for so many different reasons. Like, I did have some fun as an animator and I enjoyed, contributing to a variety of different stories and projects over the years. And then I had other kinds of fun as the developer on the developing end of animation. One of the last things I worked on was a ride for Universal Studios, which is like I
Oh,
never would have imagined doing that as a child, which is just awesome. And then being a mascot and engaging with people and making an impact in that kind of a way is a whole different kind of a thing. And then doing the voiceover is a different thing still. And so it's like there are all these different levels of, satisfaction and fulfillment from each of these different things. And it's so hard to put, any one above the other. But the thing that stands out to me the most, I think, and just kind of I talked about this a little bit earlier, is the relationships and the people that I've gotten to know and the amazing people that I've gotten to know and to work with over the years on all these various things. Excuse me, whether it's being an animator or the technical side as a developer or, voiceover, mascot, now, developing web applications and programming, serverless functions and whatnot. I'm still blessed to work with amazing people in all of these different respects. Um, so that's what stands out to me. It's not the projects, it's the people. And it's, gratitude for having those experiences with those people and being blessed by those people and how they've affected my life. Um, More so than what I may have done to contribute to the projects themselves. I was very fortunate to be part of all these things. Um, but it's not the things themselves that I remember. It's the people that I met and that I got to work with along the way that really is what stacks out above everything else for me.
well put, well put. And I guess comparing the work and the career itself is kind of like comparing apples and oranges because you've done a lot of different things. Some more closely, I guess, relate to each other, and then some of them are vastly different from things you've done in the past. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess that would be tough to compare.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you joining the show. This was remarkable. Definitely up there in my top favorite interviews.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
And
Man, it was a lot of fun talking.
once again, thank you for making this happen so fast. That was incredible. You got back to me like that day. I actually sent out a couple emails and I worked late, and I woke up and you'd replied and I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So thank you so much.
Welcome.
I don't want to put you on the spot. Are you comfortable letting me hear a few more of your VeggieTales impressions? Because you mentioned how you did, some voices that you didn't end up doing in the show.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely. What do you want to hear?
let's hear Mr. Nesser.
It's funny because one of the scenes that I tried to do anyway. So it's a scene from Jonah in one there in the middle, like the early middle part, where it's one of the first things you see where he talks about, going the pirates talking about, going into Nineveh and they go to, Nezer's, Mr. Twisty's Twisted Cheese Curl stand. And so in that scene, you've got Mr. Nezer, you've got Mr. Lunt, you've got Pa Grape, and you've got Larry. And I can sort of kind of do Larry. Mike Naraki's stuff, he's a genius, but the voice type for him is just different from mine enough. So I couldn't quite get into his as well as I could for Phil's, but I could almost do that entire scene solo. My recollection of it anyway. And I'm sure my actual recollection of the literal lines has probably slipped over the years. But that's when I kind of slip into just to kind of bounce back and forth between the various characters a bit. It starts, I'm trying to remember, at some point, there's a conversation leading up to this, if I remember correctly. But then Nezer says, I told you, boys. Wait, hold on. How don't I go? Yeah. I told you, boys, no more cheese curls until you pay your tab. You still owe me from last week. And then Lunt says, but you went, I'm blanking on the lines now. Something about the Mr. Twisty's Twisted Cheese Curl sweepstakes. And then he says, come again? Inside one of those bags of cheesy goodness is a golden ticket that'll change our lives forever.
The laugh
Oh,
too.
maybe you can come work for me. That way you can earn more cheese curls. And I kind of said, oh, that's a good idea. And then he says, so, what do you know how to do? Well, I'm pretty good at lawn dots. And then Larry says, ping pong. I can play ping pong. And then says, croquette is my specialty. And there's a long pause and he stares at them. And then Pa Grape says, when do we start? And he slams the door down.
That was great.
Monday is good for me.
That was
And
great.
they turn around, more like the voiceover. We were short on cash. It seemed that not doing anything didn't pay very well. What do we do now? Um, Nothing. You are a genius.
I could listen to you do those voices. If I didn't know it was you, I wouldn't know it was you. I would think it was from the show. That is incredible. You are so talented.
I also get occasional requests to sing the cheeseburger song.
Oh, yes, let's hear it.
So I'll do a little bit of that. I probably won't do the entire, well, maybe the first verse. I'll try to do what I can. But my voice is already kind of worn from all the talk we've done so far, but I'll give it a shot. He said to her, I like a cheeseburger, and I might like a milkshake as well. She said to him, I can't give you either. And he said, isn't this Burger Bell? She said, yes, it is, but we're closed now. But we open tomorrow at 10. He said, I am extremely hungry, but I guess I could wait until then.
Oh my gosh, you got the.
Cause you're his cheeseburger, his tasty cheeseburger. He'll wait for you, oh yeah, he'll wait for you, oh. Oh, you are his cheeseburger, his precious cheeseburger. He'll wait for you, oh. Oh, he will wait for you.
Okay, not only do you match the pitch and the tone perfectly, but like you can sing too. You're actually carrying the song. You're incredible. That is I'm smiling so big right now. That's amazing. Thank you so much. You've made my day. I really appreciate you being part of this.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor.
No, the honor's mine. Thank you again, Justin. Have a great weekend.
You're welcome, fan. Take care.